Alright, so on the first test drive I noticed the alignment was pretty bad. It's kind of crab walking on us. So I got to looking and I noticed if you look at the center tread right here in line with the fender directly above it, you can tell that the axle is this direction. It's to the driver's side about a ½ inch. This bolt holding the heim joint in on the track bar is seized up. So I'm gonna have to cut that bad boy off and replace it, which sucks. But I figured I'd make a quick video about it since I'm all deep and into this thing. I'm gonna have to do an adjustment on the drag link as well. Once I push the axle that direction, I'm going to also have to push the drag link that direction to keep the wheel aligned. So that is what I'll be working on right now. So I'll try to make a video of it as I go, but just to kind of let you know what I'm doing, by the time I'm done, the axle should be this way, about a ½ inch, I'd say, anywhere from a ¼ inch to a ½ inch. So as you can see, I was able to get the nut backed off enough to where some threads were exposed, and the nut was right there on this end of the end of the bolt you're looking at. The head of the bolt's on the other side. I was able to remove the nut enough to be able to get behind the nut and cut that nut off. So now I'm going to beat this guy out of here and get some ratchet straps on it first. That way I can keep the top of the Jeep in line and be able to suck it back over, get this bolt in once I pop it out. So I noticed when I removed the bolt after I hooked up the ratchet strap and had tension from this point to the frame up here, I was squeezing those 2 points together, and in doing such I actually pulled the axle this direction, so when I released the bolt the frame actually went that way a little bit. So, just a little bit, you can tell it's not too far off alignment. Kind of gives you an idea. Anyways, the ratchet strap wasn't necessary, so I just went ahead and removed that. And what I'm going to do now is just go ahead and take the track bar off, because now the heim joint threads are seized. So I ran into a bit of an issue I'm not willing to mess with too much just yet. I think I can make do with this without removing this bolt. This bolt is hitting the bump stop, and I'm not quite willing to mess with that just yet. So I put it back in, and I have the track bar drop down far enough now that the bolt's loose, and I can work on it down here. So that's what I'm going to do now. Try to mess with this track bar heim joint on the Jeep. We'll see how this goes. So in case you're wondering why it looked like I was doing that backwards, it's because this is a left-hand thread heim joint. these notches right here indicate that that's a left-hand thread jam nut on this heim. It is not your typical situation, but with this type of stuff it is. You can see this jam nut right here does not have notches in it. That's the link jam nut, so that means that's a right-hand thread nut. So whenever you see this, you know that you got to go the opposite direction. So righty-tighty is not the circumstance here. Righty is loosey, lefty is tighty. So keep that in mind when you see things like this. Anyways, I've adjusted this over probably about 3/8 of an inch. So we'll give her a try. Bolt it back up, see if it helps. Alright, so every time I make an adjustment on that track bar, the tire keeps turning that direction because the pitman arm and power steering pump is all holding it kind of at a steady point. So when I push the axle this way, the knuckle is turning as I push the axle out. So that lets me know that I'm clearly throwing the steering wheel off of alignment. As you can see, the tire in the back is straight, this tire is not. So what I need to do is then make sure that the wheel ends up coming out straight. I know it's not straight, but it's closer. Anyways, now I got to adjust the drag link. I got the track bar pretty good in the line. I feel a lot better about it. If you look at the center tread here compared to the fender, I feel a whole lot better about things. Looks a whole lot more accurate. So, alright, so before I cut this thing all the way through, I wanted to show you guys what I got going on here. So, I'm cutting this bolt right here, so that way there's not so much thread sticking out. This is the old bolt that I cut out of this track bar. The nut was seized on this and I couldn't get it off. It was a jam nut and it was not a nylon lock thread like this nut. This is a nylon lock thread, and that's what I plan on putting on this bolt that I am replacing this bolt with. Metal jam nuts just don't seem to get the job done. They seem to seize up on me way too much. I used to use them, and I'm definitely switching to these nylon lock threads. They work a whole lot better. I don't know, maybe other people have different opinions. That's just my personal opinion. These nylon lock threads seem to do really good, and they also kind of clean the threads out. So if I was to use this bolt here, you can see it's a used bolt and it's got some crud there in the threads, but that nylon lock thread, that kind of squeegees that goop and debris and whatever else, paint maybe, that's on the outside. So anyways, I wanted to show you what I'm doing here. So as you can see, this bolt wasn't quite the most effective, and track bars have a lot of problems with these holes wallering out. So this track bar bracket hole right here wallers out a lot of times due to situations like this. This thread section has a smaller diameter than this solid shank right here does. This solid shank, even on this side and on this side, is the same size, whereas you can see here the shank is different diameter than the threads here. So what I'm planning to do, obviously, with this is utilize this longer shank bolt, so that way the bracket sits out here on this shank and not on the threads. In doing so, that leaves me with a lot of extra thread sticking out once this bolt is threaded down. So what I like to do is cut the excess thread off, so that way the bolt's not so long and sticking out and obnoxious. This is just a little trick that helps if you're having death wobble issues, or if you're having any sort of problems with threads cutting into any sort of mounts, such as the reason I'm replacing this bolt, not only for the fact that I cut it off, but also for the fact that the shank, the shoulder, whatever you want to call it, wasn't fully seated into the second shear point of the track bar mount. And when I say shear point, I'll explain that in a little bit more depth here. So this is considered a double shear bracket because you have one solid anchor point and another solid anchor point on the opposite side of the heim. The heim is in the center of these 2 points. Some people will call it a single shear bracket if it only had this one side over here, this piece of metal coming up from the bracket. But because it has this side over here as well, this is called a double shear. Seems common sense, but a lot of people don't seem to understand that. So as you can see here, for the other end of my drag link, this is a single shear point. Tie rod is the same. It's a single shear point. If I was to weld a bracket on the back side of the knuckle that came up and over and met the top side of this heim joint, and I drilled a hole through that plate and bolted this bolt through that plate into the heim joint and through the knuckle, that would be considered a double shear point. So single shear, not as strong. Double shear, a lot stronger. This is a double shear. Again, this bolt would work just fine for a single shear point. It's still not recommended because the threads will still be in the heim joint sleeve inside, and it'll still waller. It'll still have some wiggle room. You may not be able to see it, but when you're really cranking on your wheel in a tight bind, that's what's happening, is this little bit of play is allowing your wheel to have slop. And you probably don't see it, you probably don't notice it, but it's causing strain and stress. Things are being able to wiggle. So again, double shear, longer shoulder, longer shank, whichever you prefer to call that. That way this shoulder or shank fits into the second bracket point. So you'll have that one side of the bracket here and the other side of the bracket here with the heim joint in the center. Hence the reason for the double shear and the effectiveness of this bolt. So I hope that helps. Alright, so I got the bolt in. Threads are exposed. Nut is just hand tightened. Everything is together. So anyways, you'll notice that this is still loose. The jam nut. It's not very practical to put all this stuff together with tight components. So do yourself a favor, make sure your stuff's loose if you have the room to tighten it after it's installed. I've got quite a bit of room back here on this side, so I will be able to tighten that up. In addition to this end up here, the other end of the track bar, it is also loose. Just that way I can more easily get this thing up into place. There's no point in fighting anything. Do yourself the favor and make it easier on yourself and keep everything loose. Just, if anything, hand tight. Well, something I noticed just as I was pulling myself out from under the Jeep just a second ago. This right here is a perfect example of a single shear point on the pitman arm, and you will see why it is not so effective. There is quite a lot of wiggle room in that, mostly due to the fact that there's not a washer up on the top and that it's a single shear point. So I'm gonna get this bad boy tore apart and get a washer up on top of there and get this thing cinched down correctly. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. I also think I might, looks like there's an extra washer in there, like it was used to space it down. But based upon the track bar angle and the drag link end to end, it actually looks like I might have some issues with some bump steer. So I'm definitely going to get that extra washer out of there, if anything, and put it on top maybe. We'll see how this goes. Alrighty, so as you can see here, the wheels on the Jeep are straight. However, the steering wheel is not. So that is what we are going to fix with the drag link. This is the drag link coming from the pitman arm all the way over here to the knuckle. This is not a common setup, so don't anybody expect this to be the same as theirs on their vehicle, their Jeep, their LJ, their TJ, their Cherokee, whatever it may be. This is already upgraded to what most people like to call a 1-ton steering setup because it has Heim joints with jam nuts. This one is looks like a right-hand thread. This one is a left-hand thread because it's got the notches in the nut, in the jam nut. So I'm gonna tighten all the tie rod bolts up, make sure everything's tight and snug, in addition to fixing this single shear point. Haven't got to that just yet. Just kind of want to get you guys an understanding of what's going on here and what's about to take place. Alright, so while I was loosening this up, I also noticed that the Heim joint on this end, it's kind of snug actually. It's a little difficult to tell. Let me see if I can, well, now she's stuck. There we go, now I got her loose. Alright, so this Heim joint right here is absolutely shot. That is no bueno. So I'm gonna have to replace that eventually. It'll stay on there for now. It's not going anywhere. It is not any sort of an issue that is dangerous. It just gives the steering some slop. As you can see, I have just spun the drag link that far out, and when you spin these drag links, 1-ton setups with Heims, where you have a right hand and a left hand thread on each side, you push each side out. So we've made quite a bit of adjustment. No, actually I guess we're pretty good. So that is straight-ish. Steering wheel is halfway straight. As you can see, I'm sorry, the steering wheel is almost straight, as well the tires. So I got a little bit farther to go, and I got a little trick that I will show you guys here in a second. Putting a little piece of tape in the center of the steering wheel. Alright, so get yourself a little bit of tape, look inside the vehicle, try to find the center point about as accurately as you can. You don't really need to wrap this thing. Don't get crazy with it. Just set it on there so that way you kind of know where the center is. So that way when you see it about the center, when you're outside, you know that you're centered. Also, it's probably good to have everything tight, i.e. the pitman arm bolt down there that is loose. I need to make sure that is good and tight before I go finalizing all this stuff. So this is just preliminary things. I'm just getting the idea of things closer. I can see my tape up there in the center. It's a little bit to the left, but anyways, I think you guys get the idea. That way when I'm down here adjusting this, I can look up there and see where my tape is. Alright, so I've got everything closer to adjustment. You can see a decent bit of threads here and a decent bit of threads here. However, this nut, which, like I was saying earlier, this nut is a metal jam nut. These things suck. This thing is not moving. I can't quite get an impact on it just yet, because my clearance between the tie rod and the bolt are too tight. So I'm going to lift the tub up here, try to open this gap up a little bit, see if I can't get my impact in there, and try to work on it with the impact. So that's where I'm headed next. Alright, so I'm sorry, I had to get this darn thing replaced. I was unfortunately not able to video this, didn't go quite as planned. But anyways, I got this bolt replaced. I do not have a nylock nut for this bolt, so I used a lock washer. Lock washers have worked for me for a long time. Hope this helps. That is a good adjustment on a track bar and drag link. And for anybody curious, this is the tie rod. So from here to here, knuckle to knuckle, that is the tie rod. From axle up to frame is the track bar. From pitman arm, which is bolted to the frame, up in here with the steering box bolts. So your pitman arm goes up in your steering box. Your steering box is controlled by your steering wheel. This pitman arm obviously controls your drag link, which goes out to your knuckle as well as your tie rod. Apparently my battery's dying, so my flashlight just shut off. Alright, well, that pretty well wraps that up anyways, so see you guys. Alright, so this is the second time pulling this thing out. Let's give you a quick walk around, give you an idea. Just finished the alignment. Feel pretty good about it so far. We'll see how it does on the road. Yeah, there she is in all of the beauty. See how test drive goes.